to the latest episode of the Making Lean Fly podcast. And this one, as all of them, is a very interesting one. It's called Six Sigma, the Myths and Realities. And to make this really as successful as possible, we've invited some great guests, two of my colleagues within GK and Aerospace, but also an ex-colleague and friend, Mark Sneeringer. And all of them will introduce themselves very soon, and you'll realise that they're absolutely the right people to talk about this subject. So the abstract for this episode is that Six Sigma is a well-known improvement methodology, first made famous by Motorola and GE, and now ubiquitous across industry. However, there are a lot of myths around Six Sigma. Is it a philosophy? Is it a strategy? Is it a methodology? Or is it a tool? Is Six Sigma DMAIC? Is Six Sigma DFSS? Should we use Six Sigma or Lean? This episode of the podcast aims to eradicate some of the myths and elucidate the realities with three eminent guests and masters in this field. So, without further ado, let's talk about who we're talking to today. So, let's start with Edwin, a usual guest on this podcast. Welcome, Edwin.
Thanks, Philip. For those that don't know, Edwin van den Berg. I am very proud to be leading the Lean Academy within GK and Aerospace, and as part of that, I also head up the Six Sigma program within GKN. I've started as a mechanical engineer, done some design work, and then went into manufacturing. And I first encountered Lean and Six Sigma at the same time in Royal Philips Electronics in 2005. Got my Six Sigma black belt certificate in 2009, and then took another 7 years to become a master black belt. But I've always really enjoyed the Six Sigma methodology, and look forward to going through this podcast with you all.
Thank you, Edwin. Great to have you on as always. And then next, maybe Nick, you introduce yourself, please.
Yep, Philip, thank you. Nick Walters. Currently, I'm the Global Master Black Belt for the defense business line in GK and Aerospace. It's been about 20 years in manufacturing. Most of my professional career was with Kraft Foods at their flagship facility in Illinois. I started at Kraft as an operator, working on the floor my second week out of high school, and worked my way up into roles of increasing responsibility through Kraft. Kraft is where I was first introduced to Six Sigma. I got my green belt and my black belt through Kraft. Spent a lot of time in the food manufacturing realm then before I moved to Solo Cup, where I was a quality assurance and operational excellence manager for Solo Cup. Everyone in the U.S. is familiar with the red Solo Cup product. From there, I spent some time in the window and door industry, worked for Edwin Windows and Doors, so a completely different industry from food and food packaging. So I guess throughout my career, I've had the opportunity to see how Six Sigma can be applied to many different types of industries and manufacturing. And now I'm very much happy to be applying it in the aerospace industry. Just a little bit about me.
Thanks very much, Nick. Great to have you on. And I think many people around the world know Solo Cup, having watched American Pie. So
yeah,
we all know the red beer pong cups as they're known, I think, outside
That's
the US.
it.
Yeah, thank you. And then last but not least, Mark, welcome.
Oh, hi, I'm Mark Sneeringer. I'm semi-retired. I'm doing a bit of continuous improvement and new product introduction process consulting. My last full-time job I was the continuous improvement leader for Philips Healthcare Division. That ended in 2016. I got involved in Six Sigma when I was working at GE. I was actually at the GE Research Labs at the time, and was part of the second group of master black belts that got trained by Michael Harry there at GE. Went on to become rolling out design for Six Sigma across GE, and then was the DFSS and reliability leader for their appliance business before joining Philips in their North America sales operation for healthcare. couple different roles in Philips, including working with as a program manager and quality leader for the Sonicare business, the oral healthcare business, which is, I think, when I met Philip and Edwin. And as I said, I ended up last role there as the CI leader for the healthcare division.
Great, thanks very much, Mark. And hopefully the listeners or watchers, viewers, can recognise that we've got three real experts here in Six Sigma, and I'm really looking forward to you sharing your experiences and knowledge. So let's jump into it then. So, first of all, I think it's good to define the subject that we're talking about. So, what is Six Sigma? I'm going to put you on the spot with this one, Edwin.
What is Six Sigma? Well, if you take Six Sigma as a term in itself, it's a quality indicator for the quality that a process has. So if you run a process multiple times, you get outputs, and all of those outputs should be exactly the same. In reality, they're not. So you get a distribution of outputs. And in most cases, those follow a standard distribution known in the statistical arena as the normal distribution. Now, what you want to have is as little spread as possible around that mean, and that mean should be on target. If you have a little bit of spread, the standard deviation is the terminology used to define that spread. And if you have a really high quality process, you're making sure that that spread is very small if you compare it to the customer specification limits. And if you can keep it extremely small, and the measure for it is 6 times that distance to the first customer specification limit that you hit for the mean of that process, that means that you have a Six Sigma quality level process. And in reality, that means you hardly have any defects. Chances of having a defect the next time you run your process are 3 in a million.
Yeah, thank you. I think that's a really good way of defining it, Edwin. And I think basically the ethos of it potentially is that what we're trying to do is to ensure that the quality of the product or service, and I think the service part of it's interesting that we can talk about in a bit, a product or service will deliver on the vast majority. And obviously there's a lot of statistics around ensuring that happens, but from a customer's perspective, they want to ensure that they can almost guarantee they're going to get the service or product that they require every day. So that's I think that's really important, and I think that was an interesting thing that you defined, the difference between maybe we use a shortened terminology in terms of we talk about Six Sigma, but we're actually talking about a methodology that delivers Six Sigma quality levels, aren't we? So Mark, maybe you can build on that and talk maybe about some of the history behind how this was developed.
Yeah, so as you said, it's a methodology, and it grew out of Motorola, where they started looking at this and trying to to describe the processes in terms of these statistical aspects of mean and standard deviation and that sort of thing. It grew then beyond there, probably into Allied Signal and into GE, were two of the early adopters. And from there, because of the importance of somebody like Jack Welch saying this is what we want to do, it sort of exploded in the late 90s. I would say is when when it was probably at its fastest growth rate, and then at about the same time, you had design for Six Sigma sort of come along, build on the Six Sigma methodology, but expanded into, say, new product development, that sort of thing. And from there, it's had its ups and downs, I think, since then. There's folks that are zealots about it. There are folks that are people that don't believe at all in it, and there are the rest of us who understand when it's useful and how to use it.
Yeah, brilliant. I think that segues really nicely as well, Mark, into my next question, which I'm going to direct towards you, Nick, which is, why do we need to use Six Sigma or the Six Sigma methodology? I guess Edwin's touched on it a little bit, but why is there not kind of, let's say, less complicated methodologies to achieve high quality levels? Why do we need to use this, Nick?
Yeah, I think as manufacturing evolves throughout the 2020s and beyond, it's increasingly more important for organizations to be intimate with their processes and really know and understand what their processes are telling them. And our processes speak through data. And if we want to stay agile, we want to stay ahead of competition, this intimacy with your process needs to be very, very well understood at the senior leadership level, the engineering levels, et cetera, et cetera. So if we don't stay on top of that, if we don't understand what our processes are telling us, our opportunities to improve, our opportunities to get a leg up on competition won't be there, and organizations will continue to fall further and further behind. So understanding our processes and understanding our data, thus then translating that into Six Sigma projects, Six Sigma initiatives, is how we stay ahead. It's how we continue to improve, how we continue to use this advanced problem-solving techniques to get better, to continue to deliver quality product, to push quality product all the way to the edge where the customer is fully satisfied, to push delivery times to an area where the customer is fully satisfied. I don't think we can do that unless we truly are intimate with our processes, and that's what Six Sigma allows us to do. The digestion of the data, breaking that down into the advanced problem solving required to do the Six Sigma project.
Yeah, excellent. Thanks, Nick. And I think again, as you were talking about that, it prompted another question, which maybe I'll direct towards Mark, which is, Nick mentioned manufacturing processes. I mentioned earlier, or I think Edwin might have mentioned manufacturing and service. How would you apply Six Sigma to a service? I think maybe most people can picture, a manufacturing process, widgets dropping off the end, and you measure the output and you can start to calculate what your variation or standard deviation is. How would you apply this to a service environment, Mark?
So I think of it in terms of like a manufacturing process versus a transactional process. So in the service area, it's transactional, but it's still a process. And so there's things you can measure about it, things you should measure about it, and you're going to see variation and you're going to see off target performance on those measurements that you do on that service. So let's say you're running a call center and it's how long does it take you to get to a solution for the customer, or it's a delivery process and what's your on-time delivery like? And so those sorts of things. What you find a lot of times though is those processes, there's not a lot of ready data to start working with. And so what you need to do is as the first part of the process, or the first part of the solving the problem, is gather those data. But the data are there, and just like they are in a manufacturing process. And so it's getting those data, applying the tools to them, and as you apply the tools, then that sort of exposes what the solutions can be to improve those transactional or a service process, for instance.
Brilliant. Thanks, Mark. I appreciate that. So if I think about that, I think it's a really interesting element around the service part of it. So if I think about something like recruitment, for example, Edwin, if you've got a recruitment process and you look at how long it takes you to hire people, the number of recruits you need to get for every one successful hire, and then you could look, I guess, at the retention of people once you brought them on board and the success in the role, etc. I mean, have you seen examples of Six Sigma applied to that kind of data?
I have seen some examples of Six Sigma projects applied to that kind of data. And it's an extremely interesting situation to be in, because very often in these transactional situations, we follow our gut feel, we follow our emotion, we follow our, I've done this so often, in my experience, this is what drives success in that transactional process. And then when you start to really define the things that you can measure, and then really start gathering that data, making sure that that data can be trusted, it is actually really true, the numbers that you get might be completely off. And it gives you fantastic clues on really defining what are the causes and what are the effects in the outcome of this process. And you can see new ways of making sure you have a higher success rate than you had ever imagined. So yeah, Six Sigma can definitely be used in these transactional processes and can absolutely cause breakthrough improvements to happen.
Excellent. That's thought-provoking. And, I already think of some of the process challenges we have in some of our transactional processes, to Mark's point, probably easier to talk about as transactional processes. And I can already think of some examples in our own company where we could apply this kind of thinking and this kind of approach. So that's great. Thank you, Edwin. So if I think about this, we've talked about Six Sigma, but there's this thing called DMAIC, and there's Design for Six Sigma, which Mark talked about. Sorry. So what is DMAIC, Nick? What is DFSS, and are the two similar? And how does that relate to Six Sigma?
Well, one of the things I always say about DMAIC is that it drives excellence in project management. So DMAIC: define, measure, analyze, improve, and control. And when executing a Six Sigma project, DMAIC is your skeleton. It is the foundation of how you were to structure your Six Sigma project, starting with the defining of the problem. Measuring then the data that's been collected, analyzing that data through statistical analysis, arriving at an appropriate improvement based on that analysis, and then putting in a robust control plan to ensure that the problem never comes back. So not doing DMAIC and doing a Six Sigma project is something that you can't do. You have to do them both at the same time. One of the things that I've always been interested in and that I've always kind of watched from afar is folks that I've trained or individuals I've seen working on a Six Sigma project that maybe aren't working on a project in an area that they work with on a day-to-day basis, really benefit from the rigor and the structure of DMAIC. So, for example, if an engineer has a project that he or she is working on in an area that's outside the scope of their daily duties, it's in maybe another part of the manufacturing facility, they don't have much familiarity with it, yet they're working on a Six Sigma project in that area, DMAIC gives them the structure that they need to work through that project effectively and be a good project manager as they work through the Six Sigma project. They don't know much about the process. The define phase is exactly what you need to help understand what the process is, where the problem lies, and what are the goals that need to be achieved in order for the project to be successful. If you don't know much about the process as well, you really don't know much about the data. So the measure phase, again, is really important for everyone to understand what type of data is at hand in the process. And analyze, improve, and control, all of these things are done with your project team. Again, even more impactful for an individual who maybe isn't hands-on in a particular process on a day-to-day basis. Using their team as they work through the analyze and improve phase, again, gets them more intimate with the process and the project that they're working on. And then control, obviously, one of the most important aspects of the entire journey. A solid, robust control plan to ensure that the problem never comes back again. Control is one of the more difficult phases throughout the DMAIC. I would say oftentimes it can be overlooked. And when it is overlooked, results can be disastrous because the time we invest in a Six Sigma project it can be a great deal of time. And if the problem is allowed to sneak back again, it's not good. It's not healthy for the organization to say we invest this time in this process, yet we still solve the problem, come back. Again, a reason why the control phase is so very important. So again, like I always say, DMAIC drives excellence in project management. Again, completely different than from the design from Six Sigma realm, but perhaps Mark, you'd be best to speak for design to Six Sigma.
Great, thanks. Fantastic answer, Nick, and also a really good way of passing the ball off to Mark.
Well, so the way I look at it is where DMAIC works, or where DMAIC needs to be applied, is if you were to look at your process and strip out all the variation that comes from things you can control. That's what your best operate, or your best option for that process, or the best performance for that process is. So all the tools of DMAIC and stuff are trying to remove that variation, get the process centered, and live with the process you have. Well, if you've got a process that even after you've stripped out all of that controllable variation is still not acceptable, that's when DFSS comes into play, because you have to define a new process. And so it's used mainly in new product development or new service development, things like that. But the sort of the when do I run and when do I use DFSS versus when do I use DMAIC is if that underlying process isn't capable of meeting what I need for the customer, then I'm going to have to redesign it, and that's where the similar but somewhat different tools of DFSS come into bear. So.
Great. So I guess in that case, Mark, you will use any data and know-how that you have from existing processes with similar type of attributes, and you'll find that into a new process.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, one of the things we stress is, people will sit there and say, well, I'm designing something new. I have no idea what the capability is going to be. Probably 80% of what you're designing is similar to products or processes you're already running. Go into the factory, get those capability data, take them back to the design folks and say, this is the capability you have to work with, design around this. And so there are things like capability databases, things like that people have put together to help folks that are doing design for Six Sigma understand, say, what the factory capability is or the state of the art is on these processes, so that you don't end up specifying something with an extremely tight tolerance that nobody's going to be able to build. And so that's one of the uses of the available data that you have when you're going into designing something new. That's a really, well, it's a key part, but it's also a very powerful part of design for Six Sigma.
Brilliant, thank you. I appreciate the follow up there, Mark. That really helped, I think, for the listener to understand that better. Great. Well, listen, I've got a load more questions I want to ask you all, but we've got to the point in the show where we find out a little bit more about our guests in terms of a fun fact about them. So I was going to let Edwin off the hook, but he really gave me an enigmatic answer when I asked him did he already have something prepared. So he already has something prepared. So I'm going to ask Edwin, what's your latest fun fact?
My latest fun fact is I'll need to work into it, but my office smells like popcorn. And there's a good reason for it. And the reason is everything to do with improvement and DMAIC. When we talk about root cause and finding things that we really want to eradicate, the best way to eradicate is put in place a poka-yoke device, something that really makes it impossible for the wrong state to occur. And nowadays, in many of our factories, we've got 3D printers. And people just love 3D printers, and so do I. You design something, you can print it in a couple of hours, test it out, fine-tune it, and make sure that your poka-yoke device is exactly how you want it to be at relatively low cost. And you can have it all in-house and in hand. So like I said in the beginning, I started off as a mechanical engineer. I designed things, and it's still my hobby. So what I did when I saw these 3D printers, obviously I bought one. I've got one sitting in my office. And then I realized, well, we need to take care of the environment, right? I can't just make it spit out plastics and be polluting all the time. So I print everything in PLA plastic. And PLA plastic is based on cornstarch. And if you print at 200 degrees Celsius, cornstarch starts to smell like popcorn. So in the background, when we do these recordings, secretly, my 3D printer is making nice little devices to be able to put up my phone or to be able to do something with my telescopes to shield out the sun, for instance, when I want to view solar flares. And all the time, there's this really nice smell that makes me hungry of popcorn.
It sounds like you're torturing yourself on purpose, Edwin.
Maybe, but it's just so much fun.
Brilliant, brilliant. Thank you for sharing that. I think that was another great example. Nick, what can you tell us about yourself that we might not already know?
Well, I think those who do know me know that I am a huge motor racing enthusiast, and I have viewed auto racing at over 275 different auto racing venues across the globe, predominantly in North America, some in Europe, road courses, street courses, paved ovals, dirt ovals, 275. And I'm a member of a global club, Track Chasers is what it's called. And the goal is to see as many different types of motor racing circuits as you can across the world. And I'm not the best because some of the guys in the club are up in the 1000s, the different racetracks that they've seen. So I got a long way to go, but it's all rooted in travel. My love for travel. I love to see different areas across the country, across the globe, different cultures. So that's why I do it, is because of my love of travel. I like racing too a lot, but I really love to travel more than anything.
Excellent. Oh, that's really nice, Nick. And I do remember you telling me that you've already pre-informed all your friends and family that if they ever organise a wedding or any other event during the Indy 500, you won't be there. So I know you are.
That's right. My line is always, don't die or get married Memorial Day weekend in the U.S. It's the Indianapolis 500, and I will not be at your funeral or your wedding.
Well, you've won them well. Yeah. Thanks, Nick. Thanks. And Mark, what can you astound us with?
So I think starting 18 years ago, my wife started giving me birthday cards that made fun of my age. And the first one was a group of kids looking out the back end of a school bus making faces, and it was "Youth is fleeting." And you open up the card and it said, "But immaturity can last forever." Right. So that was the first one. The most recent one was, "They say with age comes wisdom." And you open up the card and it says, "Which probably explains why people think you're younger than you are." So these cards have gone on every year. I got her back once, and I found one that was, "Don't be upset that you're a year older." You open it up and it says, "Be upset that some of your childhood toys are now worth thousands of dollars."
Brilliant, brilliant. They say a sense of humour is a success factor in a marriage, so obviously your wife's working hard at yours.
Where she finds these cards, I don't know, but she always finds one. So
brilliant, brilliant. That's great. So thank you. I think that's it's always nice to hear these little tidbits from each of the guests. So thank you for sharing that. Great. Well, listen, let's jump back in then. So I think I think the next question for me is one of these very interesting ones. Mark, I know you see these popping up on our LinkedIn feeds on a regular basis, which is Lean versus Six Sigma. And then somebody has got this infographic that tells us what Lean is, what Six Sigma is, and never the twain shall meet. And I find them infuriating and very simplistic. But so I'll ask you an infuriating and simplistic question then. So, which is best, Six Sigma or Lean, Mark?
Yes.
I was going to answer no, Mark.
So really, all of these things lie on a continuum of problem solving, and it's using the right method for the right problem. So we've been talking about data-rich problems where you may not know what the causes are, and so you need to understand those data. You need to understand the variables, and that's where Six Sigma comes in. Lean is always, to me, and Lean to me is also more of an overarching, I hate to say philosophy, but basically an approach to doing things. But Lean is more around the logic, around the logic tools, those sorts of things. And so they're on this continuum. You need both, but you need to know also when to apply which set of tools. And because not everything is a Six Sigma project, not everything's a Lean project. And so I think, I'd still say the answer is yes. So.
And I think that's the problem, isn't it? And we could get onto this, probably a whole different episode of the podcast that we could do on this, because, that's the issue, isn't it? If you look at how Jack Welch used it at GE, it was more of a strategy, or even you could say a philosophy around how he was running GE. And there was a lot more to it than just running DMAIC projects. It was about how he built his leaders, how he set expectations on problem solving, etc. Motorola was similar. Whereas at the very basic level, there's people who just have the Six Sigma toolkit and they run DMAIC projects every time there's a problem to be solved. And it's similar with Lean, isn't it? You can talk about Lean as a very simplistic toolkit that's used to get rid of waste. Or you can, as we're trying to do in GK and Aerospace, you can have a Lean operating model, which is a whole philosophy of how you run your business to deliver operational excellence. And I find this is one of the challenges when you have conversations with people. You're not quite sure what their perspective is when you use those terms, Lean or Six Sigma. What do you think about that, Nick? What's your perspective on this?
Yeah, I guess there's a reason why when you would do a value stream design event that it would birth a Six Sigma project or two, and there's a reason why when you're in the middle of a Lean initiative, whatever that might be, that might birth a Six Sigma project or two. So yeah, to Mark's point, they're very, very, very much hand in hand, and opportunities will pop when applying Lean to a process or different processes, and those opportunities might come in the form of a Six Sigma project. So absolutely, I think you got to have both. I think companies who employ both really do find the benefit and a well-rounded area of applying problem solving, not just on the Lean side, but also the advanced problem solving side that comes out of Six Sigma.
Yeah, absolutely. It's probably a little bit like asking a mechanic, is the spanner or the screwdriver better?
Exactly.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, brilliant. But yeah, I must admit, I find it very infuriating when I see these simplistic Lean versus Six Sigma infographics. They're great clickbait. They get loads of likes and comments, but I'm not sure how educational they actually are. So Edwin, I guess that puts me onto a question, which is, how can Six Sigma be used most effectively?
That's a very interesting question, because it differs. But in general, if you take a look at what we do within Six Sigma DMAIC, you do a sort of a prep cycle that basically gives you all the information you need to define an improvement. So the define stage, the measure phase, the analyze phase, they're all information gathering phases. And then you go into your improve phase, and you're defining the improvement you want to do. You want to do your pilot to prove that it works, and then you want to implement that improvement. Now, the most effective way of doing that, to me, is organizing a Kaizen event in a limited amount of time to do your pilot and then to install and scale it to the extent that you need it. So with that, then the borders between the Lean approach and the Six Sigma approach actually disappear. If you take a look at it from a little bit of a distance, to me, the most effective way is to plan in terms of a prep cycle and a Kaizen event for implementation, and then your 90-day follow-up sequence of your Kaizen event becomes your control plan. the actual installation and see through of your control plan. So the most effective way to do it is to do it in a lean way.
Brilliant, brilliant. I appreciate that, Edwin. Again, though, it's once again, what are we talking about when we talk about lean? And I perfectly understand what you're saying there, but it's great. It's good guidance there. So I guess as we progress towards the end of this, I think this is a question I'd like to kind of ask all three of you, and maybe you can build on each other's answers. Let's start with you, Mark. What are the do's and don'ts of Six Sigma?
So one of the don'ts is not everything is a Six Sigma project. So we talk about this continuum of problem solving, and so it's not everything's Six Sigma. One of the do's is measurement system analysis. I've seen so many Six Sigma projects derailed by people not having a good way of measuring the variables and stuff that they're actually working with. And then finally, I'd say the other don't is you'll hear about the 1.5 sigma shift. Don't get wrapped around that axle. It's a useful tool, but it's not something in stone. It's not something that, frankly, you need to worry all that much about as you go into doing your Six Sigma stuff. So those are ones I would put on the list. So
yeah, great, Mark. And I guess that's when you talk about not getting wrapped around the axle and something like that, this is this real balance between it being a very practical way of solving a problem and it becoming a science project, right? Certainly in the real world, we want to solve problems, we want to solve them thoroughly and properly, but it can't be to the point that we're getting stalled because we're trying to do it to the nth degree. Thanks. What about yourself, Nick? What are your do's and don'ts?
I think my number one, my do is you have to start with a culture that is willing to embrace this. For me, the people aspect of all of this, whether it be senior leadership or the individuals that we're training or executing the projects, the buy-in has to be there. They have to want to do this. Senior leadership wants to invest the time and the effort into this, and the individuals executing the project also need to want to do this. So it's definitely one of the do's is start with a accepting culture. I think my other do is kind of like I mentioned earlier, embrace DMAIC. DMAIC itself is very powerful. Use the steps as they are written, with define all the way through to control. So I guess that kind of bleeds into a don't is don't make assumptions. Even if you are very familiar with the product or the process, still use DMAIC in the manner it was designed for. If you do that, you're going to find some of the preconceived notions that you may have held maybe aren't true, right? Mark talked about the measurement phase. How many times have we seen someone say, my measurement system is good. I know it's good. We've been using it for the past 20 years. Why do I need to spend time doing a gauge R&R or attribute agreement analysis? That's dangerous rhetoric, right? So using DMAIC, stepping through the steps is very, very important. I guess my other don't then, as all that's being said, is don't make assumptions without data. Obviously, Six Sigma is very, very data rich if done correctly. And again, one of the pitfalls can be making the assumptions based on experience, based on familiarity with the product or process, and ignoring what the data is telling us. We talked earlier that data is the way that our processes speak. So listen to it and don't make assumptions before truly understanding what our processes are telling us.
Brilliant. Thanks very much there, Nick. And yeah, you re-emphasised the DMAIC part of it, which we didn't really follow up on when you brought that up earlier in the episode. And I think that's really an important thing that you're emphasising there. DMAIC it's effectively a project management tool, but it guides you through. It's that vehicle to do a Six Sigma project really, really well. And yeah, you've emphasised that a couple of times. So I wanted to add weight to that because I think it's such an important point that you've raised. So Edwin, what are your do's and don'ts?
Don't do a project in isolation. If you're the black belt, people look at you and they are going to assume you know it all. You know how to do it, and you're going to make this happen. You're not. You need those people that understand the process. You need that multifunctional team of people that give you input from all different angles on what could be causing the issue, where could we take a look, and how together can we make this to a success. The other one is also a don't. Don't do it in the office. You cannot solve project problems behind a computer working through the statistical models without actually understanding what happens in real life. So the do's become the opposites of these, right? Work with the people that understand the process. Work with those operators that have run that process for 20 years and challenge them, but also be challenged by them and have that interaction with them. And be on the shop floor, be on the area where that process runs. If it's a transactional process, be there where the transactional steps are being made and view and experience and feel why that process is running as much as why it is not running. I think those are extremely, extremely important things to keep in mind. And finally, don't get hung up in the statistics. You can go down a rabbit hole really fast. Get some help if you're stuck. There's plenty of people that know the statistics.
Absolutely. I think you brought some great points there, Edwin. I think the one that I really want to pick up on is, you didn't use this language, but it's kind of looking at black belts as the expert who's going to solve the problems. I think, some organizations, I won't name organizations, but I think some organizations have created almost a masters of the universe type of approach with the black belts where, it's kind of, there's a problem to solve. Here he comes with his underwear over his trousers and, and a cape and that's the kind of the solution to all of problems. And I guess building capability in the organization is so important, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely agree.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Right, so we're kind of really at the end now, so it probably links a bit to the do's and don'ts, but if you want to kind of summarize what you've brought to this today and give some advice to anyone who wants to start using Six Sigma or become a certified green belt or black belt, if you summarize your what you've brought to the table today, how would you give advice, Edwin, to anybody who wanted to start using Six Sigma?
I think if you want to start using Six Sigma, it can be quite overwhelming. There's all these tools and many of them are quite complex and people will give you complex issues. Don't be afraid. Get stuck in. Get that really big one, and that's going to be your certification vehicle. Because if it's the big one, the organization really needs it, they're going to support you. And that's the only way you're going to really learn. Learn how to do DMAIC, learn how to use these tools, and learn that it actually works if you follow the recipe. Because Six Sigma is a fantastic approach. It is a fantastic methodology, and DMAIC is a beautiful recipe that if you answer all the questions that are prescribed in the phases and you can trust the data, the answer will come and you can solve that problem. And with that, you can really tell everyone you've earned that certification. So go for it. Go for the big one.
Excellent. Thanks very much, Edwin. Great advice. And Nick, what would your advice be?
Yeah, I guess mine would be, truly want to do it. If you want to take the Six Sigma certification journey, whether it be green belt or black belt, really want it. Want it not only for the organization, but want it for yourself. It can change the trajectory of your career. It did mine. Again, like I said, I was an operator working on a factory floor, and I was introduced to this concept. So it is something that you can carry with you throughout the rest of your career. I truly believe it changes the way you think about problem solving. And once you reach the certification, continue to use these tools throughout the rest of your career. Maybe you won't sit down and do a 6-month Six Sigma project every other 6 months, but you very well might lean back on many of the tools that were introduced to you through the Six Sigma training. You might use those throughout your daily duties and throughout your career. But again, you have to want to do this. You have to want to change your thought process on how you problem solve currently versus how you might begin to problem solve after you get Six Sigma training. Sometimes that's difficult for folks, especially folks who are subject matter experts, folks that are very familiar with their processes, that are used to making improvement decisions on the fly right away. Six Sigma tells you to slow down a little bit, consider and evaluate and analyze the data, and make intelligent decisions on those improvements. So you have to be ready to perhaps have this challenge the way you problem solve now, and accept that your problem solving techniques are probably going to change after your exposure to Six Sigma. So again, like I said, want to do it and embrace how it's going to change you as a problem solver from the moment you get certified on.
That's great. I really appreciate that, the way you've emphasized that, Nick, and the story about changing the way that you think, your thought process. A good friend of the show, David Bovis, he talks about how we're not changing people, we're changing brains, and we're changing the way that the neurons are wired and fired. And that's essentially what you're talking about here, how it's going to change the wiring pattern of your brain so that when you encounter problems in the future, you're going to tackle them differently. So yeah, I love the way you described that, Nick. Thank you. And then last but not least, Mark, what would your advice be?
So if somebody's starting into this, I'd say, first of all, get good training and get it, and take it seriously. And one of the main parts of taking that seriously is you're going to have a project as you go through training. Keep up with the project as you go through training. Finish that project. And when you pick that project, there was a guy I used to work with in the early days of Six Sigma used to say, when we were talking about projects for training, you learn to ski on a slope called meadow, not on one called havoc, right? So pick something that's fairly simple that you can get done in a reasonable amount of time, and demonstrate to yourself and demonstrate to the folks around you that you can do the methodology. You can actually go through the full DMAIC. You can get a result that's worthwhile for the business, that sort of thing. So start, get trained, start simple, and build your competence up as you go through more projects. So
that's great. Thank you very much. So thank you very much, Nick, Edwin, and Mark. I think you've brought really some great ideas, some great thinking, some great experience to this. We promised in the abstract that we brought 3 eminent guests and masters in this field, and I think you've proven me to be right on that. So I really do appreciate it. And to the listeners there, I hope you've really enjoyed this episode. And remember, it's about changing how you lead, not who you are.